So here we are at the end of 2021, and I've long been promising that before the end of the year, I would have one more, at least, big ARC leak to go over what you can expect from Intel graphics early next year. And well, to be honest, I think up until now, you've known most of what you really need to know. I leaked the performance of it a very long time ago and talked about roughly when it's coming out and what features it will have, like XE super sampling and such, for a very long time. However, there still seems to be some conjecture going on about exactly when this series is coming out, whether to laptop or to desktop, or at least there should be, because based on the production timelines I have from inside Intel, they should not be acting this cocky about a product that they haven't even revealed the segmentation of yet, but I'm going to go through all of that today. To be clear, the information I am about to leak is based on input and documentation from around half a dozen sources at least. Obviously, I won't say exactly how many people. And I can't say what documentation I've seen, nor how long I've been sitting on some of it, but you should know that it's a very diverse set of info, that I've been sitting on a lot of it for a very long time, and some of it's very comprehensive, actually. Not all of the info nor all of my sources have as much comprehensive sets of information as the others, but putting them all together, not just one handful, but a couple handfuls of sources is, well, it's been very important for a few reasons. The first is that it allows you to make sure you aren't blinded to the full picture. Even a comprehensive set of information from a source that you know is legit can literally not be a full view of what's going on. This has led a lot of tech tubers over the past few years to completely fumble how they present an upcoming launch because they only got a large set from one source. Nobody knows everything, not even Lisa Su or Pat Gelsinger. It's impossible. There's too many products being worked on, too many moving time frames. That's not their job. Their job is to direct people, not to keep track of every little exact date and exact percentage performance. That's really a job for someone like me to talk to people all over a company and connected to the company and put it together for, let's be honest, an unbiased look. That's the other thing, too. If you get one set of comprehensive information, it's always going to be colored by who that person is, whether they're rooting for that information to end up on the positive end, or if they kind of want the product to fail, whether because they don't like the company they're working for, which is very often leakers. People are that one employee in the group that isn't happy, or it's someone that works with this company that's rooting for one of their competitors to win instead. Now, if you get in information from a ton of different people from within and outside of a company, you can sit back and go, okay, I don't really care who wins, or at least I don't, right? What do I think's going to happen? And of course, another reason it's important to get information from a lot of people before you try to put together a comprehensive picture of an upcoming launch is that, well, it makes it so that no one gets in trouble, right? There's safety in numbers. If every detail has input from a few different people, and so each maybe points on a PowerPoint slide, each one actually comes from a different combination of a dozen people or something like that, then none of it comes from one voice. You can't say one person at Intel leaked this because one person didn't. It's very hard to trace back where the leak came from because it didn't come from one person. And once you filter it through several perspectives, it's basically impossible to tell. Well, as long as you don't show like leaked slides from within a company, which almost no leaker should ever do ever, because that can only give people away. In other words, I am very sure of the accuracy or the authenticity of what I'm telling you today. Things may change, and some things almost certainly will. They always do, but I just need to make it clear that what I'm leaking is straight from the horse's mouth, or really horses' mouths, and not all of the details will feel 100% new. Maybe I leaked them before, and of course many others have been leaking tons of random launch dates and configurations for at least a year. Some of them I can tell were 100% fabricated from the usual charlatans nobody should listen to, but most of the leaks, whether from me or others, are just honest leaks of what's being tested, and a lot of different DG2 samples have been tested of all different types of configurations. But here we go. Right now, I am confident there are about 6 final iterations being tested for launch. A 512 execution unit model, a 384 execution unit model, a 256 execution unit model, and a couple of 128 execution unit flavors and a 96 EU variant as well. So that's 512, 384, 256, two 128s, and at least a 96 EU one. And I actually do need to spend a few minutes going through some of the research I did and giving some context around the segmentation before I show the summary, because I feel like if I don't do that, some of the stuff I will summarize in my leak today won't make sense to a lot of people because, well, Intel is taking a very interesting approach. If we pull up that slide that I'm probably going to keep showing throughout this leak because I think it's just a very fascinating and well-organized snapshot into Intel's mentality from a few months ago, we can see that they are trying to cover all the way down to the entry level and up to the lower high end with just 2 dies that are wildly different in sizes, which is a atypical approach for sure, although not entirely atypical for someone like Raja Koduri that effectively was competing all the way in the high end and down to the lower mid range with just Polaris and 1 single Vega die for years, with addition to 1 smaller Polaris die in the RX 560. But so this isn't weird for Raja to consider doing, but well, does this make any sense? Well, let's start with SoC1, right, which is supposedly covering all the way to above a 3070, hopefully, if it overperforms, and down to below a 3060, most likely. This is 1 die competing with all of those cards, supposedly. Now, the top model is 512 execution units, 60 gigabytes of RAM, 256-bit. We've known this for over a year, actually. This isn't big information there. I have no problem believing that. And then, of course, the cut down model, the 384 execution unit, one with a 192-bit bus, it's cut down by 25%. That's a normal amount to cut down a die. We've seen multiple times in history. Yeah, I think that will be probably around a 3060 Ti, maybe a little weaker in performance, but then, of course, cheaper with more RAM. Those 2 segmentations make sense. It's that 256 execution unit model that made me do hours of research because, well, that would mean cutting the 512 model in half. Remember, SoC2 is 128 execution units at the top configuration. So they would have to disable their SoC1 by 50%, which, if I look through history, isn't normal. Like, I can't find a single card that did this, besides one from Fermi 1.0, one of the worst, if not the worst, yielding generations of graphics cards in history, and I had to use a Quadro 4000, which still only had half of its shaders disabled. It still had most of its bus enabled, whereas the 256 execution unit model, as you'll see in my summary, actually is 128-bit. So, at the very least, this has kind of been done before, but only on a generation that had horrible yields. And when I reached out to contacts, no, TSMC 6 nanometer is not having any yield problems. If Intel is doing this, and the more I dug, they are. This model exists, a 256 execution unit model from SoC1, then they're doing this by choice. Well, what would that choice probably be? Is it to have something weaker than a 3060 on desktop while not needing to make another SoC? The answer, I actually believe, is no. It's for laptop, and it's a way to brute force their way into having the most efficient mid-range gaming laptop card. Think about it. They could make a separate 256 execution unit die to get more capacity, but alternatively, what they could do, and what it seems like they are doing, is go, those 384 execution unit models that don't clock quite as high, we don't want to deal with that. What we want is 512 execution units at peak performance, and then 384 execution units at peak performance. And then instead of doing something like the RX 6800, which is a 25% disabled die and clocked lower, we're just going to say if there's any low clocking 25% disabled dies or any dies that need more than that disabled, it should be a small amount that do, we're just going to disable half of it and have basically only golden samples. Disabling half of the execution units, I'm sure it's just all peak clocking dies, and there will be a lot of dead silicon for heat dispersion in a laptop. I think this is Intel's way of brute forcing the most efficient laptop card and just using 2 dies to do so. And in fact, all references I've seen in documentation are to laptop models. And there's some whispers of maybe a 256 execution unit professional card, which also is expected to be more efficient than the desktop variants. And even though if you look at this chart here, which let me say this, people need to remember that Intel does not know what AMD's cards are going to be named before they came out, and that there was no 6600 non-XT in the RDNA 1 lineup. There was just the 5700 XT, the 5700, and then a more disabled version of 5700 that they called the 5600 XT. So when you look at this chart and you see 6600 XT, they think this is the most disabled Navi 22 that's never released to desktop, but is on laptop with 10 gigabytes of RAM. They expect the bottom SKU, the 256 model, to be below this in performance and above what they call the 6500 XT, which you look at the pricing and the performance tier, is actually what they thought the 6600 XT would be named. Remember, guys, that the 5500 XT was its own die, and so they kind of thought that there would just be a Navi 22 called the 6600 XT, and then a Navi 23 called the 6500 XT, but they got the naming wrong. And yeah, I think on laptop with all golden samples, this 128-bit card can be something firmly stronger if we look at where it falls on the tech power-up chart from a 3070 Ti than a 5600 XT. That's what I think that model is, something surgical for the mid-range laptop market that is stronger than a 5600 XT, and that's an interesting approach. Anyways, though, what about the rest of the lineup? What is it going to look like? When's it coming to laptop? When's it coming to desktop? When's it coming to workstation? What are the prices probably going to be? I'm about to leak all of that right now, but first, an ad from a sponsor. Happy holidays, everybody. Today's video is brought to you by Atlas VPN. It's almost 2022. Christmas is almost here. You should have a VPN for the new year that helps you protect your data, prevent monitoring, and enjoy streaming content that's usually arbitrarily locked from being watched in all regions of the world. It's absolutely ridiculous, and in fact, a VPN can be much more than just that. A VPN can also block ads and malware for you, including malicious links and ad trackers, and actively try to get you the lowest price a company offers while shopping this holiday season, subverting many companies' attempts to target you for higher prices depending on your operating system or region. Atlas VPN protects you from this type of stuff, and it also works on unlimited devices. And, well, it does all of this without massively slowing down your internet speeds. Again, right now, Atlas VPN is running a huge discount. They're throwing in 4 months of free service on top of 3 years. That is 86% off, meaning you pay only $1.39 a month. That's right. This holiday season, give the gift of privacy, security, and not getting overcharged depending on what operating system you use. Click the link in the description to help Moore's Law is dead and also help yourself. Use Atlas VPN today. All right, let's get into this rather girthy leak for today. I've actually organized this into 3 different slides because of just how much information there is. The first is going through these segments being tested and overall performance information, and then the second slide tells you exactly where those segments are going into specific SKUs for different markets, and the third slide is the rollout, so you can get a good idea of when you can actually buy these things. First of all, SoC1. This is what Intel refers to the top 512 execution unit die. That leak was definitely legit. And these are the segmentations of that die being tested right now. A 512 execution unit model validated for 18, 16, and 14 gigabit per second GDDR6 over a 256-bit bus. Now, 32 gigabytes is being considered for a professional card, but that would require a new board layout. So it's not coming anytime soon. And as we've known for a while, you know the TDP on desktop is around a 3070. On laptop, it's 120 to 150 watts. And that 150 watts is if it can share thermals with the CPU, something AMD also does right now. Then there's the 384 execution unit model, the one cut down by 25%, validated for 16 and 14 gigabit per second memory with a 192-bit bus, and again, using energy closer to a 3060 Ti or 3060. On laptop, this is meant to be in the 80 to 120 watt segment. Then there's the 256 execution unit model. Yep, the 512 cut in half, meant for the 60 to 80 watt segment. This model definitely exists, but there's just a little bit less information circulating around it. And, well, either way, SoC1 goes into planned production. Again, planned. Who knows if problems happen? Mid-February. And AIBs are pretty annoyed by this. They were hoping to test their boards in January. And I guess all I can say about this is those people saying this is coming to laptop in December or something, well, they literally won't have made it yet. So I know that's not true. The only thing that could be around is sampling of specific early pre-production releases. But the actual production run of the big dies is starting in mid-February. And that means that gaming desktop could get SoC1 at the very, and I mean like March 28th or later, very end of quarter one. And most likely, though, the real launch after a paper one is early quarter two, and then laptop next, and then workstation versions last in late 2022. Now let's move on to the second SoC, the 128 execution unit model. Here's the segments being tested. There's a top 128 execution unit model validated for 16 and 14 gigabit per second memory on a 96-bit bus, as I've recently leaked. And if this or when this comes to desktop, it will be 75 watts or less. I have actual pictures. I can't show all of them because it could give people away, but you know the renders. So far, none of these boards have any 6 pins attached to them. This is just from the PCIe. And then there's the laptop variant, basically. The 128 execution unit model cut down to a 64-bit bus with 4 gigabytes of memory. This is for the 35 to 50 watt laptop segment. And then a 96 EU execution unit model that I believe should be 64-bit with 35 watts or less on laptop. This model has a little less information around it, but I mean, it definitely exists. SoC2 production is planned to start at the end of January. So this one is going into production before the high-end desktop models. But again, so if it starts production literally like the last day of January, assuming nothing goes wrong up until then, by the way, think about what that actually means. You need a few weeks to build any desktop boards. That means that most likely you're going to get a somewhat of a paper launch of laptop low-end ARC cards in quarter one, with most OEMs I've talked to saying they really don't expect widespread laptop availability of any ARC models to the end of late quarter two, meaning I would actually argue ARC is coming to desktop first, unless you count paper launches on laptop. Now, again, there will be some, Asus or Dell laptops with this in quarter one, but it really won't be widespread available until quarter two based on every OEM I've talked to, whereas AIB say low-end could launch in March, but not high-end. And moving forward, supports PCIe 4.0. I don't remember if anyone's confirmed this, and it's kind of like a duh, but I can 100% confirm it, so there you go. And the workstation aims, here's a quote, to be 10% cheaper than Nvidia counterparts while offering 10% more performance after drivers mature. And they do believe the high end will need a little bit of time for drivers mature, but I think this quote is very important for the next slide. Keep this in the back of your mind here. They're planning to put a segment of their card next to Nvidia one, have it cost 10% less, and offer 10% more performance. That tells you what to expect for pricing depending on how things shake out, I believe, even on consumer desktop. As when I look around, consumer cards are pretty consistently about a third the price of their professional variants. But anyways, let us move on to the likely lineup here. So on desktop, RTX 3070 or 3070 Ti competitor. Remember, the 3070 Ti is like 9% better than the 3070, so it's not a big gulf there. If it overperforms, it'll be around a 3070 Ti, and if it underperforms, it'll be at a 3070. And that's that model that we've heard of forever with those specs. I'm really not going to dwell on it. Below that, the 384 execution unit model. This is something I believe will be probably a hair below the 3060 Ti in performance, but they consider it the same tier, and so they'll charge at least 10% less, maybe $350. And then, of course, it will offer more RAM than the 3060 Ti, and it'll probably make the 3060 look silly. Then we have the GA107/Navi 24 competitor. This is the 128 execution unit model that could really launch in quarter one to desktop. There is room for both an 18 gigabit per second overclocked model. Again, they validated that top model to 18 gigabit per second. None of the actual ones I'm seeing being tested for final release have 18 gigabit per second, but it is validated to it. And so you cannot rule out that if there's a 225 watt model competing with a 3070 or 3070 Ti, that they might give you one with 15% more bandwidth, push it up to like 250 watts or more, and hopefully give you something as strong or stronger than a 3070 Ti. But again, it's up to Intel. They seem to have a big deal about efficiency with this generation. So I don't know if they will do that just yet. And of course, they can always launch some like dirt cheap $100 card with 2 gigabytes of RAM if they want to. But on laptop, this is where they are planning to compete with RTX 3070 and 3080 laptop cards. Keep in mind, the 3080 laptop card is really in between a 3060 and 3070 in performance. It's basically a throttled 3070 Ti. And I have to say 3070 or 3080 because, again, so the laptop 3070 and 3080 are based on the same die. And depending on the TDP, if you have a 150 watt laptop 3070, it will almost certainly outperform the 80 watt version of the 3080. And then, of course, there is the 384 execution unit model planned for a laptop. This will compete with 3060s and 3070s, depending on the TDP. And then the 256 execution unit model. This one, I believe, is surgically striking the 3060 and 3050 Ti with 8 gigabytes and probably the same performance as a laptop 3060 that uses about 60 watts. Maybe not the top 3060s, but the laptop 3060s that are constrained by TDP. This one is planning to really hit that segment hard. And then, of course, maybe some of the 3050 Ti's. Of course, if they give it 8 gigabytes of RAM, it's just a joke to get a 3050 Ti over this, though. And then there's the 3050 laptop competitor. That's pretty clearly what the 128 execution unit model is targeted at. You know, so you're like premium thin-in lights that want to have okay or at least serviceable gaming performance. That's what this one's for. And then I am seeing a lot of references on laptop to a 96 execution unit model. When I look over what this will likely perform as, I would say it's pretty clearly between an MX450, almost certainly stronger than that, but not quite as strong as a 1650 Max-Q. And then workstation, that's right. The top model right now is planned to be a A4000 killer, having the same price as an A4000 with the same amount of RAM, but offering performance closer to an A4500. And below that, there is a 12 gigabyte model reference that I'm assuming is 384, but remember, who knows if they give it like 448 or 416. This one is planning to be basically A4000 performance with less RAM, but also closer to that $800 to like $950 range. And then there's the 8 gigabyte model that I have heard about. Now, I don't know, I suppose, if this is based on an 8 gigabyte version of that bottom laptop SoC2 SKU, or I guess second to bottom, the 128 model. But I do know there's an 8 gigabyte model, and it's going to cost around an A2000. So I do believe that the workstation segmentation will get one of those 256 execution unit models with 8 gigabytes. And, well, I'm sorry, if this is the same price as an A2000, I think it'd absolutely blow it out of the water if it's $400. And then the 32 gigabyte direct challenger to an A4500, A5000, and W6800, that is being considered, but this would come out later. And they're not sure if it's worth launching in quarter 3 or 4 when, well, by then next year, we'll be talking about probably professional Lovelace and RDNA 3 cards on the horizon. It's up to if they think that will make any sense to launch. But if they do this, I just want you guys to know that they actually plan to undercut heavily. Like, this could be half the price of an A5000 with 32 gigabytes of RAM and almost the same amount of performance. So I hope they do it if they can get it out soon enough to make sense. And then, of course, there is a slim chance of a 6 or 8 gigabyte low-end ARC Professional card launched in quarter 2. That's why I was a little sketchy about the execution unit model of that 8 gigabyte workstation card. I've heard that there could be low-end ARC Professional cards in quarter 2 already, whereas the rest of these are stated to be late in quarter 3 or quarter 4. And then, well, it's also worth mentioning that many of those other leaked configurations that we've seen, 448 execution units, 192, all of those, who knows if they eventually put those in professional. I'm just saying right now there doesn't seem to be any plans to. All right, now let's get to the final part of this leak. A summary of when these things are launching. All right, and before I do that, here's some testimonials from Intel partners, because I think this is worth giving context. You understand that things are still a little odd over there at Intel Graphics. One source says the dates communicated to us by Intel have been rubber banding a lot over the past quarter. It's not always a delay they communicate, but seriously, they have moved dates up or down about a dozen times since fall. And it's frustrating. A lot of AIBs have their boards basically done being designed for the AIB models, and they're pissed they can't test them yet. They're hoping to get at least some pre-release samples to test in December, but right now, they still don't have them. And another source says that, well, this person isn't really worried about the performance of DG2 anymore. Something just seems off at Intel Graphics in terms of execution and management. I really can't say more without revealing too much information, but that's all I'm saying when you see what I am going to communicate in the launch dates, because I know Intel just released a trailer acting like they're so confident they're launching in Q1. I just don't have that confidence, even if that's what they're saying publicly. Now, in Q1, this is when production begins. Like I said, January for the SoC2 and February for SoC1. Expect lots of pre-release samples to leak in January, both from before the official production run and then eventually the official production run of SoC2. And expect workstation cards to be sampling by the middle of Workstation 1, although again, a lot of these will probably be based on pre-release silicon. Then mobile SoC2 should effectively paper launch in March. Now, there will be some laptop models maybe you can get a hold of, not too hard, but the large degree of tons of different ARC laptops really won't be out until Q2. And that's why the next segment I actually just call Q1/2, because there's just something mercurial and murky going on about these launch timeframes where I'm just not convinced it's a big real launch in Q1, at least not for most of the models. And so I'm just calling it Q1/2. This means most of it's really probably going to be late March and April. All right. So desktop SoC2, the 128 execution unit model, will be ready, but not necessarily launched by the beginning of Q2. If they want to launch it at the end of Q2, it should definitely be ready. But I just don't know if they're going to hold all of the yields for a widespread laptop release. But this one could launch to desktop first, and there's definitely room for it. And a lot of AIBs are suggesting that might happen. Then AIB models of desktop SoC1. So AIB 512 should come next, as these should be physically ready by April. But it's unclear if they will release it by April outside of a paper launch, because the drivers are still a major concern. Not a major concern long term, but a concern if they will be ready for the highest end models optimizations before to get it out in March. And also the reference cards won't be ready for SoC1 until mid Q2. So you see where I'm going with, it's not that clear cut when these things are launching. The reference fans and builds won't be ready from Intel until the middle of Q2. So actually an AIB launch could theoretically happen before the reference launch. It's just, it'll depend on if the drivers are ready. And most evidence at this point suggests that they might do a paper launch with AIB models, but hold back the overall launch of everything until the drivers are 100% ready, probably in April or something. And then laptop DG2 won't be widely available till very late Q2, according to multiple OEM sources. So that's when you should expect to get one. Not saying you can't get one before that. Maybe you will, but that's when you should expect to be able to if you're actually planning to get an ARC laptop. Next, Q3 for the workstation launches. 16, 12GB, and 8GB cards should be out by late summer. If Intel decides to, they can launch a 32GB high-end workstation card probably in Q4. And then, this final juicy tidbit I want to put here at the end of all of this information. In 2023, I'm told by multiple sources, Intel wants to directly compete in the high end with Battlemage. That's why they're wondering if it's even worth bothering with a 32GB high-end workstation card at the end of 2022, if already in 2023 they're going to have high-end workstation cards directly competing possibly with RDNA 3, maybe even RDNA 4. I know everyone says that's not possible, but again, a lot of people said that AMD wouldn't possibly compete with high-end Ampere with the follow-up to RDNA 1. And they did. It's certainly possible for Intel to more than double performance late 2023 from what they're releasing in early 2022. Right now, though, Intel knows they can only compete in the lower high end, and they're choosing to. Just like AMD knew they could only really efficiently compete up to the upper mid-range with RDNA 1, and they did, and then they prepared for a big RDNA 2 launch. This generation from Intel is about cementing market share in low-end and mid-range laptop and desktop, and it sounds like there's a decent chance they may be successful, at least on the OEM side. In fact, talking to an Nvidia source, I'm told that one major reason Nvidia continues to push into crypto so much right now is because they really do expect to be pushed out of low-end laptop and OEM desktop basically overnight by ARC. In fact, some OEMs I talked to about this said, oh, a desktop 3050? We don't care about that. I honestly think that NVIDIA is planning their 3050 series for desktop in Q2, not just to compete with Intel and AMD, but because they need to have a release valve to send GA107 and maybe more cut down GA106 stock to once they're not sending it to as many laptop contracts. That's what NVIDIA is planning for. And in fact, I'm starting to suspect that's what AMD is planning for with their Navi 24 do-it-yourself desktop launch as well. Anyone remember that large portion of my Navi 24 leak recently where I was talking about how surprising it was to a lot of my sources that AMD's launching a 120-watt version of Navi 24, a card that they clearly were planning to be a big market runner for a laptop? Yeah, I think AMD's preparing a version of Navi 24 to compete in a segment of desktop it was never really meant to compete in at first, because they know they might not actually get a lot of laptop contracts with this when Intel's hitting that segment so hard, bundling it with their Alder Lake mobile CPUs. So as much as you might worry that this is bad for AMD and Nvidia and laptop, it's good for us gamers in do-it-yourself desktop. It really seems like there's going to be a lot of low-end competition in the first half of next year, because there has to be, because AMD and Nvidia have to go for that. And actually, I think there's a big opening for AMD here. I think they can launch Navi 24 before ARC's even out, and if they have an aggressive price because they feel like they have to, because they're not going to get as many laptop contracts with Navi 24 as they thought they would, that's great for us consumers. You can already see it. All these new cards coming out, coming to segments we didn't expect them to be in. Competition is coming back to desktop graphics cards, finally. And the final thing I will say is volume. I can't promise you if ARC will be easy to get at MSRP. It's entirely out of, well, even my control to know that, and Intel's control. It depends on how much Nvidia and AMD cards are supplied at the same time. Like if Nvidia's not supplying any cards in Q1, then no, it won't be easy to get ARC, because ARC can't make up the entire market. But what I can say is that my understanding of how much GDR6 Intel is stockpiling ahead of time, that they have been for months, they're planning for a very big launch. So if they want to, and I can't promise you it's all going to desktop, though. That's the thing, right? I don't know. Maybe it'll go to laptop mostly, but Intel is at very least preparing for a far, far, far bigger launch than what RDNA 2 had in its first holiday season, and certainly than I think we've seen out of a lot of recent launches. So if I were to say, and again, it's not a guess so much as I have to call it a guess because you can never be sure. But if I had to say what the availability is going to be like, it's like once it's finally out, and again, I think there could be a lot of shenanigans with paper launches. Once it's fully out, I think you could see availability like what the 6600 XT had at launch day for a lot of ARC products in the first half of next year. But it's too early to say exactly how many, and you can never be 100% sure because it all hinges on how many cards Nvidia supplies themselves. And, well, I'm just excited to finally have what seems like increasing competition in a market. And, well, I'll be covering all of these launches and more leaks to come over the next few months. Make sure you're subscribed to the Moore's Law is Dead YouTube channel and ring the bell button to not miss out on the other upcoming comprehensive leaks. There will be a lot of RDNA 3, probably some RDNA 4 and Lovelace leaks coming early next year from me. You're not going to want to miss it. But otherwise, please consider supporting Moore's Law is Dead on Patreon, where you'll get early ad-free access to Broken Silicon, the ability to ask me and guest questions. My next guest is Mr. Matty Plays, talking about Xbox Game Pass and the current console versus PC hardware situation. You can ask him and me questions there. And then, of course, you get exclusive podcasts like Die Shrink and really so much more content. It's all out there for you, and we couldn't do this without our patrons. So please consider it. But to everyone else watching, thank you for watching.